When a struggling farmer hung a $1 sign on his wild blue roan Mustang, no one in town believed what would happen next. From cracked soil and a fire-lit night to a storm that returned hope, this horse carried secrets, confessions, and second chances. Stay with me, because the moment the gate finally opened, the choice the Mustang made stunned everyone. The morning broke slowly over the Snake River plain, the sky painted in pale strokes of lavender and rose before the sun climbed above the distant Tetons. Frost lingered in the creases of the potato fields, their cracked rows telling the story of a summer without enough water. Ethan Cole stood on the sagging porch of his farmhouse, denim jacket pulled tight against the chill. His hand rested on an old brass bell, its surface dulled by decades of weather. He gave it a gentle shake. The sound was low, heavy, and strangely mournful, carrying through the stillness like a memory too stubborn to fade. From the corral, a shape stirred. The blue roan Mustang lifted his head, ears pricking toward the sound. His coat shimmered in the dawn light, a stormy mix of slate and silver, the kind of coloring you couldn't buy, only inherit from mountains that refused to be tamed. The black of his mane rippled down his neck as he stamped once against the frozen ground. His eyes, amber and alert, locked on the man by the porch. Ethan let the silence draw long between them. That sound, the bell, wasn't a command, only an invitation. And yet Ash, wild-hearted as the day he was taken from the Chalice Range, paused his restless circling to listen. Ethan's boots creaked as he stepped down from the porch, dust rising even in the morning damp. In his other hand, folded neatly but trembling, was a sheet of paper. He nailed it to the weathered fence post by the corral gate. The hammer struck once, twice, echoing against the empty barn. When he stepped back, the words stared out at him in bold black ink. Opening bid, $1. The paper fluttered in the breeze, ridiculous in its simplicity. A price tag for something priceless. Ethan felt his stomach twist as though he'd just betrayed a friend. He wiped his hands on his jeans, but the ink of the decision clung to his palms. Behind him, the screen door creaked open. Lily stood there barefoot, her long hair tangled from sleep, her 14-year-old face caught between girl and young woman. She clutched the doorframe as if holding herself steady against a storm. "Dad, you really did it," she whispered. Her eyes flicked to the sign, then to Ash, who had begun pacing again, nostrils flaring, catching the scent of change in the air. Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to explain, about the unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen table, about the drought that had strangled his harvest, about the medical debt from a life already gone. But the words sat like stones in his chest. Instead, he forced out something that wasn't an answer at all. "It's just paper," he muttered, though both of them knew it was more. Ash gave a sharp snort, pawing at the ground, his muscles rippling under that storm-colored coat. He looked every bit like the wild thing Ethan had first laid eyes on 3 years ago, untamed, unbroken, and unwilling to be boxed into a price. The bell swayed gently in the morning breeze. Ethan picked it up again and rang it once more. The sound was softer this time, almost pleading. Ash halted mid-step, ears tilting toward him, eyes locked in wary recognition. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. It was just a man, a girl, and a wild Mustang caught in a moment too fragile to last. "Breakfast's getting cold," Lily said quietly, but she didn't move from the doorway. She stayed there, watching as her father stood at the fence line, watching as the Mustang lowered his head ever so slightly at the sound of the bell. Ethan didn't reply. His eyes remained fixed on Ash, memorizing every detail. The smoky dapples, the black mane, the way those amber eyes held a storm he recognized all too well. In the distance, the town of Teton Falls stirred awake. Trucks rumbled to life, and the day's work began. But on this farm, time seemed to stand still. A sign hung on the gate. A price had been set. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew that everything had just begun to unravel. By mid-morning, the frost had burned away, leaving the fields bare and thirsty. The soil stretched out in long, parched furrows, brittle and cracked like the skin of a forgotten drum. Ethan stood at the edge of his potato crop, boots sinking slightly into dust that should have been damp with autumn rain. He bent down, scooping a handful of earth. It sifted through his fingers, fine as ash, a reminder of how little life was left in it. The sound of an engine drifted down the county road. A white truck slowed by his mailbox before moving on, but not before Ethan noticed the bright orange envelope sticking out from the metal flap. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward it, every step heavy with dread. Inside the envelope was a letter he already knew the words to. Another warning from the irrigation district. If he didn't pay the overdue fees, the water line would be shut down by Friday. Without water, the rest of his crop wouldn't make it through the week. Without the crop, there would be nothing left to sell at market, nothing to keep the bank from taking what little remained. He crumpled the paper in his fist and shoved it into his jacket pocket. His shoulders sagged beneath the weight of debts that weren't just financial. He carried the memory of hospital rooms, the pale light across his wife's face, the machines that hummed louder than any prayer. Those bills had never stopped arriving, even after she was gone. They piled higher than the hay bales in his loft, reminding him every day of what he'd lost and what he still owed. The screen door creaked again. Lily appeared with a chipped bowl of cereal in her hands, milk sloshing dangerously close to the edge. She didn't say anything, just walked toward him with her shoulders hunched against the wind. She handed him the bowl without meeting his eyes. "You should eat something," she murmured. He took it, staring at the soggy flakes, then back at the endless furrows. "I'm not hungry." "You never are." Her voice carried no anger, only the dull exhaustion of a girl who had learned too soon how silence could hollow out a home. Ash shifted in the corral, his dark mane tossing as he paced the fence line. The blue roan's ears flicked toward them, catching every sound, every hesitation. He had the restless energy of something that had known freedom and could not forget it. His coat shimmered under the noon sun, blue and black mingling like storm clouds rolling across open sky. He pawed at the earth, stirring dust into the air. Lily watched him, her jaw tight. "He doesn't belong here," she said, though her tone was more about herself than the horse. Ethan set the bowl on the fence post and wiped his hand across his mouth. "None of us do anymore," he admitted. The silence between them was filled by the creak of the barn roof and the distant buzz of a neighbor's irrigation pivot still running. Other farms had water, barely enough, but enough to survive. His did not. The unfairness of it gnawed at him, but anger required energy he no longer had. Lily reached for the fence rail, resting her palm on the sun-bleached wood. Ash slowed his pacing, turning his head toward her. For a long moment, horse and girl regarded each other from across a gulf of mistrust. The wind tugged a strand of hair across Lily's cheek, and she let it stay there, frozen by the intensity of the Mustang's gaze. Ethan noticed the way her shoulders softened, the smallest hint of curiosity flickering in her eyes. But as quickly as it came, she looked away, her face shuttered. "I have homework," she muttered, heading back toward the house. He watched her retreat, cereal bowl forgotten on the fence. Ash gave a low nicker, almost questioning, before resuming his steady patrol along the rail. Ethan leaned against the post, pulling the orange envelope from his pocket again. He unfolded the letter, reading the words until they blurred. Past due. Immediate action required. Words that might as well have been stamped across his chest. He thought of the auction set for Saturday. He pictured Ash standing in a ring under fluorescent lights, strangers shouting numbers as if value could be measured in increments. He thought of Travis Pike and men like him, their boots polished, their hands clean of dirt, seeing only profit where Ethan saw a partner. The thought twisted inside him until he pressed the paper flat against the fence rail, as though pinning it there might keep the world from collapsing further. The bell hung motionless in the breeze, a dull weight on the porch beam. Its silence seemed louder than any sound. He remembered the first time he rang it, months after bringing Ash home from the adoption pen. The Mustang had bolted to the far corner of the corral, wild-eyed, sides heaving. Ethan had sat there for hours, not chasing, not calling, just waiting with the bell in his lap. Over time, the sound had become a bridge. But bridges could burn as easily as they were built. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of sage and dry earth. Ethan's chest ached with the knowledge that the soil beneath his boots was slipping away, turning into something that would no longer sustain them. He closed his eyes for a moment, whispering words meant for no one to hear. When he opened them again, Ash was watching him, head tilted, ears forward. The Mustang stood still, framed by the barren fields and the sagging fence, his coat flashing silver blue as a cloud passed over the sun. For a second, Ethan felt the ground beneath him crack, not just with drought, but with the weight of a choice he could no longer avoid. He turned toward the house, the orange envelope still clutched in his hand. The cereal had gone untouched, milk curdling in the bowl. Inside, the kitchen table waited with more letters, more notices, more reminders that time was running out. And behind him, in the corral, the blue roan resumed his restless pacing, as if he already knew what the paper nailed to the gate meant for both of them. The afternoon sun slanted across the valley, turning the dust into a haze of gold. Ethan was repairing a sagging section of fence when a pickup truck rattled up the drive. He wiped his brow, squinting as Maria Torres climbed out, her arms full of bales of alfalfa cut from her uncle's smaller field upriver, where water still trickled. "You'll need this more than he does," she said, nodding toward the corral. Her hair was pulled into a messy braid, her face streaked with sun. Maria was the kind of neighbor who never asked permission to help. She simply showed up when she knew it was needed. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the look she gave him silenced the words. "Thank you," he said instead, his voice low. They stacked the hay by the barn, the smell sweet in the brittle air. From the corner of his eye, Ethan saw Lily standing near the porch, pretending to study the battered math book in her hands. She wasn't reading. Her gaze kept drifting to Ash, who circled the corral like a storm contained by splintered boards. Maria noticed. "She should try," she whispered, keeping her voice just for Ethan. "She's not ready," Ethan muttered. "Neither is he," Maria replied with a nod toward the Mustang. "But that's how trust works. Two broken edges sometimes fit better than you'd think." When Maria left, dust trailing her truck down the gravel road, Lily finally walked toward the corral. Ethan stayed back, tools in hand, heart hammering as if he were the one about to climb through the fence. Ash stopped pacing, his dark ears swiveling, his coat catching the fading light. The blue roan's muscles bunched as though preparing to bolt, but he held his ground. Lily slipped her fingers under the rail, knuckles white. Her breath caught as Ash blew air through his nostrils, the sound sharp, uncertain. For a long stretch of silence, neither moved. Then Ethan remembered the bell. He lifted it from its hook and rang it once, the note low and steady. Ash's head jerked toward the sound, ears forward, eyes bright. He took a tentative step closer, dust puffing around his hooves. Lily froze, her palm hovering just beyond the fence. Another step, then another, until the distance was less than the length of her arm. The Mustang stretched his neck, nostrils quivering as he tested her scent. Her hand trembled. Ethan nearly called her back, afraid the horse would shy away. But then Ash lowered his head, brushing his velvet muzzle against her skin. The contact was feather light, a fleeting breath more than a touch, but Lily gasped as though the world had tilted. For a moment, there was no drought, no bank, no letters stamped past due. There was only a girl and a horse, two creatures scarred by loss, finding something fragile between them. Ash pulled back, tossing his black mane, but his eyes never left hers. Lily's lips curved into the smallest smile, one Ethan hadn't seen in months. She whispered something he couldn't quite hear, words carried off by the breeze, but he caught the shape of her mouth. "Thank you." Ethan swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. He set the bell down gently on the porch rail, afraid even sound might shatter the moment. The corral seemed to hold its breath. Ash pawed once at the dirt, then retreated to the far side. But the air had shifted. A bridge had been built, as fragile as spun glass, but real nonetheless. Lily turned to her father, cheeks flushed. "Did you see that?" He nodded, his throat too tight for words. For the first time in months, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full of something else. Possibility. The sun dipped lower, painting the fields in copper light. Beyond the horizon, trucks rumbled along the county highway, carrying potatoes to markets that Ethan might never reach again. But here, in this small corral, something had changed. Ash stood in the fading glow, his blue roan coat shimmering like smoke and steel. He had chosen, if only for a moment, to trust. And Ethan knew that choice mattered more than anything written on paper or posted to a gate. The Saturday market in Teton Falls carried the smell of grilled sausages, fresh coffee, and dust rising from boots that had walked too many fields. Ethan parked his truck along the row of vendors, its paint faded and bed scarred from years of hauling hay. He wasn't here to sell. There was nothing left to bring. But Lily insisted on coming. She wanted to see people, maybe forget the silence that hung in their house like an unwanted guest. The stalls stretched down Main Street, colorful tents shielding jars of honey, handcrafted saddles, piles of russet potatoes, and baskets of apples glowing like lanterns. A bluegrass band strummed near the courthouse steps, their banjo notes spilling into the morning air. Families wandered between vendors, hands full of produce and paper cups of cider. Ethan felt out of place, as though everyone else belonged to a rhythm he'd long forgotten. He kept his cap pulled low, eyes scanning the booths more out of habit than interest. Lily walked ahead, her shoulders straighter than usual. She stopped at a booth displaying leather bracelets, fingering one with turquoise beads. For a moment she looked like the teenager she was supposed to be. not the girl weighed down by grief and fear. It was there, at the edge of the crowd, that Ethan saw him. Travis Pike. The man leaned casually against a hitching post, polished boots catching the sunlight. His smile was practiced, the kind that never reached his eyes. He tipped his hat when he noticed Ethan, then pushed off the post with the slow ease of someone who knew the ground belonged to him. "Cole," Travis drawled, his voice slick as oil. "Heard you've got yourself a blue roan out there. Rare color. Folks would pay a fortune for one like that." Ethan stiffened. "He's not for sale." Travis chuckled, the sound low, dismissive. "Everything's for sale when the bank's at your door. You set that opening bid at $1, didn't you? Word travels fast in a town this size." Lily appeared beside her father, holding the bracelet she'd chosen. Her eyes flicked between the two men. Travis tipped his hat to her, his smile tightening. "Afternoon, miss. Fine day for shopping." Ethan moved slightly, positioning himself between them. "We're leaving." But Travis stepped closer, his cologne too sharp against the earthy scents of the market. "Look, I'm not the enemy here. I can take that horse off your hands, give you cash, real money, more than you'll get at auction when the traders come sniffing." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Ash isn't going anywhere with you." For a flicker of a second, the man's smile faltered, revealing something harder underneath. Then it returned, smooth as ever. "Suit yourself. Just remember, Cole, debt collectors don't take kindness as payment. Neither do irrigation boards. When the water shuts off, you'll wish you'd taken my offer." He walked away, boots clicking sharp against the pavement, leaving behind a trail of unease. Lily tugged at her father's sleeve. "Who was that?" "Trouble," Ethan muttered. His chest felt tight, not just from the encounter but from the way people had turned their heads to watch. He knew what they were thinking. Another Cole on the edge of losing everything. They left the market, the turquoise bracelet still in Lily's hand. Ethan didn't ask if she'd paid for it. He didn't have the heart. The weight of Travis's words followed him back to the truck. He gripped the steering wheel, staring out at the open highway. Beside him, Lily finally spoke. "Dad, what if Ash doesn't end up with someone good?" The question cut deeper than any insult Travis had thrown. Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel, knuckles whitening. "I won't let that happen." But even as he said it, doubt pooled in his chest. The market stalls faded in the rearview mirror, their bright colors swallowed by the dust rising behind the truck. The road stretched ahead, long and uncertain. Back at the farm, Ash was waiting. The blue roan tossed his mane as Ethan stepped out of the truck, eyes sharp, ears pricked. The Mustang pawed at the ground, restless as though he too had sensed the shadow of the man who lingered now in their story. Ethan leaned against the fence, exhaustion seeping into his bones. The memory of Travis's words coiled in his mind like barbed wire. "Everything's for sale." Ash blew a breath through his nostrils, the sound steady, grounding. Ethan reached for the bell on the porch and rang it once. The note spread across the farmstead, carrying farther than he intended, as though it might drown out the voice of the man at the market. Ash's head turned instantly, eyes finding Ethan's in the fading light. For a moment, the tension loosened, replaced by the fragile reminder that trust was still possible, if only for as long as they could hold it. The notice came nailed to the post of the mailbox, flapping in the late afternoon wind. Ethan saw it as soon as he turned his truck into the drive, its orange paper impossible to miss. He tore it free, his fingers already knowing the texture of bad news. The words were short, clipped, written in the language of bureaucracy that had no room for mercy. Service terminated. He crumpled it in his hand, standing at the edge of the gravel road as dust settled around his boots. A tractor growled in the distance, another farmer's pivot irrigating a circle of green just visible across the valley. His own fields stretched behind him in brittle rows, curling leaves and empty soil. Without water, they weren't just dying. They were already dead. The screen door banged, and Lily appeared on the porch, her hair tied back with a strip of red cloth that once belonged to her mother. She looked at him, then at the paper in his hand. They shut it off? Ethan's shoulders sagged. As of today. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she walked back into the house, the door swinging closed with a hollow thud. Ethan stood for a long moment, staring at the paper before stuffing it deep into his jacket. He knew what waited inside. More envelopes, more numbers he couldn't make add up. Ash was restless that evening, circling the corral with sharp, deliberate steps. The Mustang's coat caught the dying light, blue-gray dapples shimmering like storm clouds rolling low over the plain. He tossed his head. Ears pinned back, sensing the change in the air. Animals always knew when survival had been compromised. Ethan leaned on the fence rail, exhausted. I can't keep you, he whispered, words pulled from a place deeper than pride. The Mustang snorted, pawing at the dirt. The sound carried through the still air, louder than it should have been, like a rebuke. Inside, the house was darker than usual. Lily sat at the table, her homework spread before her, though her pencil had long stopped moving. The silence pressed heavy between them. Ethan pulled a chair, but before he could speak, she asked, "When's the auction?" He hesitated. Saturday. Her eyes lifted, sharp, accusing. And you'll let someone like that man at the market take him? The image of Travis Pike's smile cut through him. I'll do everything I can to stop it. You said you wouldn't let Mom go either. The words were quiet, but they struck harder than any shout. She pushed her books aside and went to her room, the door shutting with finality. Ethan sat at the table, staring at the unpaid bills. Across one envelope, the word "final" had been stamped in red. He thought of online ads he'd skimmed weeks ago. Quick farm loans, debt consolidation, even refinance with no credit check. Terms meant to lure the desperate, with promises of relief that came at crushing interest rates. He had ignored them, knowing they were traps. Yet tonight, he understood why people clicked. The farmhouse felt cavernous in its quiet. Ethan rose, opened the back door, and stepped outside into the cool night. Stars scattered above like spilled grain. He lifted the old brass bell, its weight familiar in his palm, and rang it once. The note traveled across the empty fields, a sound older than electricity, older than debt. Ash stopped pacing. The Mustang turned his head, ears twitching, eyes catching the starlight. Slowly, cautiously, he walked toward the fence. Ethan stood still, letting the horse close the distance. Their breaths mingled in the cool air, one ragged with human worry, the other steady as the earth itself. For the briefest moment, Ethan felt the ground solid beneath him again, as if trust, between man and horse, between past and present, was the only water left. But when he returned to the house, the paper nailed to the mailbox still burned in his pocket. The water was gone. The crops were gone. And in 3 days' time, Ash would be on an auction block, his future hanging on numbers shouted by strangers. The silence of the house closed in once more. The county fairgrounds smelled of dust, hay, and fried food drifting from concession trailers parked along the fence line. Pickup trucks lined the gravel lot, their beds filled with folding chairs and coolers. The auction barn itself was already buzzing when Ethan pulled his old Ford into a space near the back. He sat there for a long moment, his hands fixed on the steering wheel, watching people file. Inside. Most were ranchers, boots worn, hats sweat-stained. Others were traders, their clean shirts and polished belts setting them apart. Lily sat quietly in the passenger seat, arms folded across her chest. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes betrayed the swirl of fear she tried to hide. "Do we have to do this?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted to the trailer hitched behind them. Inside, Ash shifted restlessly, the thud of hooves echoing in the metal box. The blue roan had loaded reluctantly, nostrils flaring, muscles taut. Ethan had whispered to him the whole time, his voice low, steady, carrying no promises he couldn't keep. Now, the horse stood in shadow, the only sound his uneven breathing. Finally, Ethan turned to his daughter. "There's no choice left." The words tasted bitter. He reached for the door handle, but Lily's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise you'll fight for him. Don't just let them take him." He covered her hand with his own, squeezing once. "I'll do what I can." Inside the auction barn, the noise swallowed them whole. Voices rose and fell. Boots scraped against concrete, and the metallic rattle of gates clanged as livestock were moved in and out of pens. Dust hung in the air like smoke, catching in the beams of fluorescent lights overhead. Mike Larson, the auctioneer Ethan had known since boyhood, spotted him and gave a nod. His eyes carried a mixture of sympathy and calculation. "You're up last," he said, clipboard tucked under his arm. "Give folks time to settle in." Ethan nodded, his stomach knotted tight. He walked to the holding pen where Ash had been led. The Mustang stood apart from the other horses waiting in line, his coat shimmering under the barn lights. His ears flicked nervously, but his posture was proud, defiant. The blue roan wasn't made for this world of concrete and noise. He belonged to the ridges, to the wind sweeping across open ranges. Ethan pressed a hand against the gate, leaning close. "Easy, boy. Just a little longer." The auction rolled on. Cattle bawled as numbers were shouted, bids climbing in quick bursts. A line of quarter horses went through next, their prices modest but steady. Ethan sat on the edge of the ring, every call of "sold" tightening the knot in his chest. Lily stayed close, her fingers twisting the turquoise bracelet she'd bought at the market, a talisman against the fear building in her throat. Finally, Mike stepped to the microphone. "All right, folks, last lot of the day, and it's one that's been stirring some talk around town." His voice carried through the barn, seasoned with years of performance. "We've got here a 5-year-old blue roan Mustang, gentled by our own Ethan Cole. Some of you may have read about him in the Gazette. A rare color, strong build. Now, let's start the bidding." The room hushed. Eyes turned toward Ethan, then toward the Mustang led into the ring. Ash's hooves clattered against the concrete floor, his head high, mane tossing as he resisted the lead rope. A ripple of admiration moved through the crowd. Mike smiled tightly. Opening bid, $1. The words landed like a stone thrown into still water. A beat of silence, then a low murmur spread. Some laughed under their breath, shaking their heads. Others leaned forward, intrigued. One man raised his hand. 1. Now 2. Do I hear 2? Mike called, voice quickening. A second hand shot up. 2. The bidding leapt forward, numbers tumbling one after another. 5, 10, 20. The traders joined in, their eyes sharp, calculating. They saw profit, not partnership. Ash circled the ring, muscles taut, but every so often his gaze sought Ethan in the crowd. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, the noise faded. At $30, the pace slowed. Mike pushed harder, his rhythm insistent. Come on, folks. You won't see another like him. Strong bloodlines, rare color. Who'll give me 50? From the back, Travis Pike raised his hand, his smile cutting across the room. 50. Ethan's stomach turned. He could hear Lily's sharp breath beside him. Travis leaned against the post, confident, daring anyone to challenge. Another bid came, 75, then 100, but Pike kept raising, always steady, always sure. The numbers climbed higher than Ethan expected. 150, 200, 250. The crowd leaned in, energy rising with each call. Yet all Ethan could hear was Lily's voice in his head. Don't just let them take him. Ash halted suddenly in the ring, tossing his head, ears pinned back. The handler tugged at the rope, but the Mustang's focus was elsewhere. His eyes locked on Ethan, and then he stilled. Ethan's hand went instinctively to his pocket, fingers brushing against the bell he'd carried here, hidden beneath his jacket. He resisted the urge to use it, knowing the moment wasn't for sound. It was for choice. Mike's chant filled the air. 300. Do I hear 350? Hands wavered, traders weighing numbers against risk. Travis lifted his hand again, voice smooth. 350. The barn seemed to tighten around Ethan, every eye now turning to see how far this would go. Lily gripped his arm. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. Please. The blue roan snorted, stamping once. Dust rose around his hooves, a storm contained by the ring. Ethan knew that whatever happened next would decide more than just a sale. It would decide whether trust meant anything at all. And as Mike's voice echoed, "Do I hear 400?" The bell in Ethan's pocket felt heavier than ever. The bidding had reached 400, then stalled. Mike's voice still carried its sing-song cadence, coaxing the crowd, but the rhythm faltered as hesitation spread. Dust swirled in shafts of fluorescent light, and all around the ring people leaned forward, curious how far this would go. Travis Pike stood tall at the back of the barn, hat tilted, smile fixed like a blade. He lifted his hand again, his voice smooth. 450. The words rolled across the barn like a challenge. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ethan's chest tightened as he saw the traders exchange glances, most of them already calculating profits and costs, deciding if the blue roan was worth the risk. Ash stood in the center of the ring, sweat darkening the dapples on his flanks, but his head was high. His eyes sought Ethan's through the noise, through the chaos. The handler tugged on the lead rope, but the Mustang resisted, stamping once. The sound echoed, sharp, demanding attention. Mike seized the moment. There's power in this one, folks. A rare blue roan, strong as the land he came from. Who'll give me 500? The barn went quiet, breath held. Then a voice rose from the front row, not a trader's, not one of the ranchers. 500. Every head turned. Standing slowly from his seat, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick, was Amos Redbird. His weathered face was calm, his long braid streaked silver under the lights. The Bo Lao of the Shoshone-Bannock Nation rarely came to auctions, and when he did, it wasn't to buy. Mike hesitated only a second before regaining his rhythm. I've got 500. Do I hear 550? Travis laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. What's a storyteller want with a Mustang? His words dripped contempt. Amos met his gaze, unflinching. Stories deserve to be protected, he said simply. Then he lifted his hand again. 600. The crowd buzzed. Ethan's throat went dry. Lily clutched his arm so tight her nails dug into his skin. Dad! But he couldn't speak. He could only watch as the rhythm of the auction shifted. 600! Do I hear 650? Mike's chant quickened again, sensing the drama. Travis raised his hand. 650. Amos. 7. Travis. 750. The numbers climbed higher, faster, each bid a hammer strike. Sweat gathered at Ethan's temples. He had expected the horse to go cheap, maybe swallowed by traders who saw him as pounds of meat or a quick flip. He hadn't expected this. A contest of wills between a man who saw profit in everything and a man who spoke for something older than money. At 800, Travis paused, jaw tight. He glanced around the room, gauging whether anyone else would carry the weight for him. None did. The farmers folded their arms, silent witnesses. The traders leaned back, out of the game. It was down to him and Amos. 800 once, Mike called. 800 twice. Travis shot his hand up. 9. Do I hear 950? Amos stood straighter, his voice carrying clear. 1,000. The barn erupted in murmurs. It wasn't just the number. It was the certainty, the finality in Amos's tone. He wasn't playing. He wasn't haggling. He was claiming. Travis's smile cracked, and for the first time he looked uncertain. His eyes darted to Ethan, full of unspoken threat, then back to the ring. But his hand stayed down. Mike slammed the gavel. Sold! $1,000 to Mr. Redbird. The sound echoed like thunder. For a moment, the barn was stunned into silence. Then the whispers started. Why Amos? What's he planning? Ethan couldn't move. Relief warred with confusion, with fear. Ash turned his head, eyes locking on him again. There was no celebration in the horse's gaze, only the same fierce steadiness, as if nothing had changed at all. Amos walked slowly to the gate, his stick tapping against the concrete. He signed the papers without ceremony, then turned to the crowd. His voice carried, deep and deliberate. This horse is not leaving Teton Falls. He will not be shipped away, not broken for profit, not destroyed for someone else's gain. He belongs here, with the people who understand what trust costs. The barn fell silent again. Some nodded, others frowned, but none spoke. Amos turned to Ethan, his dark eyes unreadable. Cole, you and your daughter will keep him, for now, but not as yours alone, as part of something larger. Ethan's lips parted, but no words came. Amos tapped his stick once against the ground. You'll build a place where children and veterans can learn what it means to walk beside a Mustang. You'll open your gates, and you'll keep this one safe. Lily's eyes shone, tears balanced on the edge. She looked at her father, waiting. Ethan's chest tightened until it hurt. He wanted to say no, that he had nothing left to give, that he could barely hold on as it was. But the weight of the crowd, the steadiness of Amos's gaze, and the silent demand in Ash's amber eyes pressed against him from all sides. He nodded once, the smallest gesture. Amos inclined his head. Then it is settled. Ash blew through his nostrils, tossing his mane, as though punctuating the moment. The gavel still echoed in Ethan's ears. $1,000 had changed hands, but what Amos declared was worth far more. The Blue Roan would stay. And with that declaration, the future shifted. Not saved? Not yet. But set on a path Ethan had never imagined when he nailed that paper to his gate. The house was dark when they returned from the fairgrounds. The only light a weak glow from the kitchen bulb, humming with age. Ethan closed the door behind him, the silence pressing heavier than it had in months. On the drive back, neither he nor Lily had spoken. She had stared out the window, clutching her bracelet, while he replayed Amos Redbird's words in his mind. "You'll open your gates. You'll keep this one safe." Ethan lowered himself into a chair at the kitchen table. Bills spread across the surface like a deck of losing cards. He pushed them aside and buried his face in his hands. His body ached, not from labor, but from the weight of something he could no longer carry alone. The sound of footsteps drew his eyes up. Lily stood in the doorway, hair falling over her shoulders, her face pale, but resolute. She lingered there for a moment, then crossed the room and sat opposite him. She didn't fidget. She didn't look away. "Dad," she said quietly, "why did you really buy Ash in the first place?" Ethan swallowed hard. He needed saving. "That's not what I mean." Her voice sharpened. "You could have saved any horse. Why him?" Ethan's throat closed. He had never spoken it aloud. He traced the wood grain of the table with his finger, searching for words that had no shape. Finally, he forced them out. "Because the day your mother died, I thought I could save everything but her." Lily froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Ethan stared past her, into the dark beyond the window. "The storm came faster than the forecast said. She wanted to wait it out, but I pushed us all into the truck. I was afraid the barn roof would give, afraid the horses would be trapped. I thought if I could just get them safe, the rest would follow. But the roads iced over. You remember the sound when the tires lost grip. I can still hear it." His voice cracked, the words nearly breaking. "When the truck hit the ditch and she—" He stopped, his hands trembling. Lily's eyes shimmered, her face twisting as she struggled between anger and grief. "So all this time, you've been, what? Trying to make up for it with another horse?" Ethan's head dropped. "I blamed myself. Still do." The silence swelled, filling every corner of the small kitchen. Outside, a breeze rattled the loose gutter, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "I hated him, you know," Lily whispered. "Ash, from the first day, because I thought he was the reason you weren't there for her, the reason you've been half here ever since." The words landed like stones, but they were truth, and Ethan didn't flinch. He nodded slowly. "You have every right." For a long time, she didn't move. Then her eyes shifted, catching something beyond him. The shape of the corral through the window. Ash stood near the fence, the moonlight tracing silver across his blue roan coat. He was still, head low, watching. Without a word, Lily rose and walked to the back door. Ethan followed, uncertain. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Lily crossed the yard and stopped at the fence. Ash lifted his head, ears pricking forward. She didn't reach for him this time. She simply stood, shoulders trembling, tears streaking her face. And then, as though drawn by something older than grief, Ash stepped closer. His breath puffed in the cool air, nostrils flaring. He pressed his muzzle against her shoulder, a weight that was both anchor and release. Lily broke then, sobs shaking her frame. Ethan stood back, his vision blurred. He had no words left to give. But perhaps none were needed. The horse had spoken in a language older than guilt. When Lily finally turned, her eyes met her father's. There was no forgiveness yet, no healing completed. But there was recognition that the truth had been spoken, and that was the first step neither of them could take alone. They walked back to the house together, the blue roan watching from the fence, his mane dark against the starlight. Ethan held the door for his daughter, his voice rough as he whispered, "I should have told you sooner." She didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. And for Ethan, that silence was its own kind of grace. By the next week, the hum of hammers and the rasp of saws replaced the silence that had hung over the coal farm for too long. Old lumber, scavenged from barns that had collapsed during harsher winters, was dragged across the yard. Fence posts were set, lines drawn, corners squared. It wasn't pretty, but it was something new. A paddock being built not to contain, but to invite. Maria Torres leaned on a post, sweat streaking her temple, a smile tugging at her mouth. "It doesn't have to be perfect, Ethan. It just has to hold people, not fences." Ethan nodded, driving another nail. His hands, calloused from years of farm work, found rhythm again. Lily carried boards from the stack, her bracelet glinting in the sun. She hadn't spoken much since the night of confession, but her presence was steadier, less brittle. By Thursday, the frame of the paddock stood against the backdrop of dying fields. It wasn't much, 20 yards wide, rails rough and uneven, but it was enough for Amos Redbird to nod his approval when he came to inspect. "A circle," he said simply, tapping the earth with his stick. "A place where no one stands above another. Good." The first gathering happened that weekend. A handful of children arrived with their parents, curiosity outweighing caution. A small group of veterans came, shoulders tight, eyes wary of the open space. Nora Kim appeared with her recorder, notebook in hand, her voice hushed as though entering sacred ground. Ash was led into the paddock, though led was hardly accurate. He walked at his own pace, the rope slack, ears flicking at the murmurs of the crowd. His blue roan coat caught the late sun, dapples glowing like stormlight on water. He stopped in the center, head high, surveying the strangers who had gathered. Ethan resisted the urge to step forward, to control. Instead, he sat on a low stool by the fence, an old paperback open in his hands. He began to read, his voice low and steady. The words weren't remarkable, just lines from a forgotten Western novel, but the rhythm carried. It was the same rhythm he'd used in the early days with Ash, when trust had been too fragile for touch. At first, the children whispered, restless. One boy asked why nothing was happening, but then Ash shifted, his ears swiveling toward Ethan's voice. Slowly, he lowered his head. A subtle sign, but enough to hush the murmurs. The veterans watched closely, their own breathing evening out, shoulders loosening as the Mustang's stance softened. Lily stood by the gate, hands clenched. She wanted to move closer, but something held her back. Ash turned toward her, amber eyes steady. He took 3 steps in her direction, then stopped. It was invitation, not demand. Lily swallowed hard, lifted her chin, and stepped into the paddock. Gasps rose from the crowd, but Ethan kept reading, his voice unbroken. Lily walked slowly, her boots scuffing the dirt. She stopped just a few feet away. Ash didn't retreat. Instead, he leaned forward, nostrils flaring, and brushed her sleeve with his muzzle. The children whispered excitedly, the veterans sat straighter, and Nora scribbled furiously in her notebook. Amos smiled faintly, murmuring, "The circle is working." For the first time in months, Ethan saw pride flicker across his daughter's face. Not the brittle defiance she had worn since the accident, but genuine pride. She looked back at him, her eyes bright. He gave the smallest nod, his chest tight with something like hope. The gathering ended with quiet conversation, laughter among children, and veterans lingering longer than they had intended. Nora promised a feature on her podcast. A dollar horse, a community's chance. That night, after everyone had gone, Ethan lingered by the paddock. Ash grazed quietly within, the rails glowing silver in the moonlight. The farm still carried its debts. The fields were still brittle, the future uncertain. But here, in this circle, something fragile had taken root. Lily came to stand beside him. She didn't speak, only slipped her hand into his. They watched Ash together, silent witnesses to the possibility that even cracked soil might yield something new. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. For the first time in years, the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full. The letter came folded in an envelope stamped with the state's seal. Ethan nearly tossed it into the growing stack on the table, assuming it was another warning or bill. But when he tore it open, the words stopped him cold. Grant approved. Funding allocated for irrigation upgrades, drip systems, pipes, a chance to save what remained of his farm. He read it 3 times, scarcely believing. For weeks, his fields had been nothing but cracked soil and shriveled vines. Now, suddenly, there was a promise of water. A second chance. Lily found him still holding the letter, his hand shaking. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan gave her the page. She read, her lips moving silently over the lines. When she looked up, her face lit with something he hadn't seen in years. Hope. "Dad, this means we can stay." He wanted to believe it, wanted to let the weight slide off his shoulders. But the truth was more complicated. A grant was only money on paper. Water still had to flow. Neighbors had to cooperate, and promises from officials often dissolved in the dust of politics. He folded the letter carefully and set it on the table, not daring to let his heart rise too high. That afternoon, word spread quickly. At the feed store, men clapped Ethan on the back, congratulating him. At the diner, a waitress poured him coffee on the house. "Looks like things are turning around," she said with a smile. Ethan forced a nod, uneasy under the sudden attention. But whispers carried in the same current as praise. Near the door, he caught fragments of conversation. Voices lowered, but not enough. Funny how the man who can't pay his bills gets state money. Maybe that paddock's just a cover. Who knows what he's really up to? The words burned. Ethan had lived long enough in Teton Falls to know how quickly kindness could shift to suspicion. By evening, Travis Pike made sure the doubts grew louder. He stood on the courthouse steps after a council meeting, his polished boots shining in the streetlight. "Folks," he said, his voice smooth as honey, I don't begrudge a man getting help. But should tax dollars prop up a farm that's already gone under? Should one man's Mustang project take resources from families who've been paying their dues? He didn't mention Ethan's name directly, but everyone knew. Heads turned, conversations thickened, and the whisper of doubt became a steady murmur. At home, Ethan walked the perimeter of the paddock, lantern swinging in his hand. Ash followed his movement from inside, ears flicking, muscles rippling under the lamplight. The blue roan seemed unbothered by rumors, unconcerned by grants or debts. He cared only for the bell's chime and the steady presence of the man who refused to leave him. Lily joined him by the fence. "People are talking," she said softly. "They always do." "But it matters, doesn't it?" Her eyes were sharp, too wise for her years. Ethan sighed, resting a hand on the rail. "It matters if we let it." In the distance, the sound of water trickling through a neighbor's pivot reached them. It was a reminder of what could return here, if promises were kept. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. The night air smelled of sage and dust, but underneath it lingered something else. Possibility. For the first time in months, the land didn't feel entirely lost. But even as he stood there, the echo of Travis's words gnawed at him. Whispers could cut deeper than drought. And though the grant brought the gift of water, it also carried a price. The weight of being watched, judged, doubted. Ash stepped closer to the fence, pressing his muzzle against the rail. Ethan reached out, his palm brushing the coarse hair of the Mustang's neck. In that quiet contact, he found steadiness. Whatever the town said, whatever suspicions spread, he knew this bond was real. Still, as the lantern's glow flickered across the yard, Ethan understood that saving the farm would take more than water. It would take proving to the town, to his daughter, to himself, that trust could stand against doubt. The wind came first, hot, dry, restless, sweeping across the sagebrush hills with a hiss like whispers no one wanted to hear. By late afternoon, the sky had shifted from pale blue to a strange copper haze, the kind of color that made even seasoned ranchers glance nervously toward the horizon. Ethan felt it in his bones before he saw the smoke. He was patching a gate when Lily burst from the house, her face pale. "Dad, look!" He straightened, squinting west. Beyond the ridge, a column of smoke boiled upward, black and angry, spreading fast across the brittle land. The drought had left the valley a tinderbox, and now someone had struck the match. Neighbors were already on the move. Trucks roared past on the county road, men shouting from windows, women tossing hoses into pickup beds. The volunteer fire crew's siren wailed in the distance, thin and frantic. Ethan felt his pulse quicken, his body remembering the chaos of other emergencies, other nights when time had turned against him. He ran to the paddock where Ash circled, nostrils flaring at the scent of smoke. The blue roan was wild-eyed, muscles bunching as he tossed his mane. The other horses in nearby fields screamed and kicked at fences, panic rippling through the valley like lightning. "Easy, boy," Ethan called, his voice steady though his heart hammered. He reached for the bell on the porch and rang it once. The sound cut through the rising noise, low and anchoring. Ash froze mid-stride, ears flicking toward him. But then the wind shifted and sparks carried down the ridge, glowing embers tumbling into dry grass. Flames licked the edges of the coal farm, climbing fast. Lily clutched his arm. "We have to get him out." Ethan grabbed the halter, but Ash jerked back, the whites of his eyes flashing. He wasn't a domesticated horse used to ropes and trailers. He was a creature of the mountains, and fire was older than fences. He reared, hooves striking sparks from the packed earth. Maria arrived in her truck, slamming the door behind her. "Fire crews are on the north end. You need to move him now before it cuts you off." Ethan cursed under his breath. He tried to clip the rope again, but Ash lunged sideways, almost knocking him to the ground. The Mustang's terror was palpable, contagious, pressing against Ethan's own fear until it felt impossible to breathe. Then, through the chaos, a sound split the air, a gate clanging open. Ethan whipped around to see the corral door swinging wide. Someone had pulled the latch. Ash bolted, a blue-gray streak into the smoke. "Who opened it?" Maria shouted, shielding her face from the embers. Ethan didn't answer. He already knew. Travis Pike's truck had been seen near the ridge earlier that day, and this smelled of sabotage more than accident. But there was no time to dwell. Ash was gone, and the fire was moving fast. He grabbed the bell, clutched it tight, and sprinted toward the rising smoke. Lily called after him, her voice breaking. But he didn't stop. The world had narrowed to one desperate need: find the Mustang before the fire did. The air thickened, acrid with burning sage. Sparks rained down, stinging his skin. Ethan pulled his shirt across his mouth and pushed deeper into the haze, the bell heavy in his hand. His lungs burned, but he forced himself forward, calling into the roar. "Ash!" Somewhere ahead, hooves pounded against dry earth, frantic and unmoored. Ethan rang the bell once, the note muffled by smoke, but clear enough. He rang it again. Through the swirling haze, he caught a glimpse, the flash of a black mane, the shimmer of a coat streaked with ash and sweat. The Mustang spun in circles, trapped between instinct and fear, unable to find direction. Ethan moved slowly now, crouched low, voice steady. "Easy, boy. Listen to me. Listen." He rang the bell again, softer this time, letting the sound linger. Ash's ears flicked. His chest heaved, eyes wild, but he stopped moving. The space between them held more weight than any rope. Another gust of wind drove flames closer, heat searing Ethan's skin. He could feel time thinning. He took a step forward, then another, never breaking eye contact. "Come on, boy. We've walked this path before. Trust me now." Ash shuddered, then moved. One step, then two, until his muzzle pressed against Ethan's shoulder. Relief surged so strong it nearly dropped him to his knees. He wrapped an arm around the horse's neck, the bell clutched tight in his other hand. "Let's go," he whispered. Together they staggered through the smoke toward the glow of headlights and the shouts of neighbors. Lily's voice carried through the haze, calling his name. When they emerged from the curtain of fire, she ran to them, tears streaking her soot-stained face. She threw her arms around Ash's neck, the Mustang trembling but alive. Behind them, flames climbed higher, consuming the ridge. Fire crews battled the blaze through the night, hoses hissing, men and women working until their arms gave out. By dawn, the fire was contained, but the valley smelled of smoke and loss. Ethan sat on the porch steps, Lily leaning against him, Ash grazing quietly nearby as though nothing had happened. Maria joined them, her eyes weary. "It wasn't an accident," she said flatly. Ethan nodded. He didn't need proof. He'd seen the pattern in Travis Pike's smile. For now, though, Ash was alive. And that was enough. The fire had been beaten back by dawn, but the valley still wore the scars of its rage. Blackened sagebrush stretched for miles, and the acrid sting of smoke clung to every breath. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat on the porch steps, the brass bell heavy in his hand, its surface smudged with soot. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the glow of flames, heard the frantic pounding of hooves in the dark, felt the weight of ash pressing against him, as if trust itself had been forged in fire. Lily came outside, her hair tangled, her face pale, but steady. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, one for him, though she knew he drank it more out of habit than want. She sat beside him, her knees pulled to her chest. For a while, they just watched Ash grazing in the charred field, his blue roan coat streaked with soot, but shining still in patches of silver blue when the light touched. "He chose you," Lily whispered. Ethan stared at the bell. Maybe. Or maybe he just had nowhere else to go. She shook her head. "No, he came to you in the fire. You didn't pull him. He came." Ethan didn't answer, but her words settled in him, a truth he wasn't ready to name. By mid-morning, neighbors stopped by, their trucks crunching over gravel. Some brought food, others offered tools, a few just wanted to stand in the yard and shake Ethan's hand. Survival in Teton Falls had always been communal, even when suspicion lingered. Yet beneath the gratitude was an undercurrent of unease. Everyone had heard about the corral gate. Some swore it had been the wind. Others weren't so sure. Ethan caught the way Maria's eyes hardened each time Travis Pike's name was mentioned. That afternoon, Maria arrived with fresh bandages and salve. She insisted on checking Ash, though the Mustang stood tall, ears forward, defiance untouched. She rubbed ointment along a scrape on his flank, her hands gentle, her voice low. "He'll heal," she murmured. Then more pointedly to Ethan, "But you won't always be able to." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "You run into fire after him. Next time, maybe you don't come back. You can't keep living like you've got nothing left to lose." He bristled, but before he could reply, Ash snorted sharply, as if punctuating her words. Maria stepped back, wiping her hands. "You have to decide if you're saving him, or if he's saving you." That night, the valley was eerily quiet. No insects hummed, no coyotes called. Only the faint crackle of smoldering brush carried on the breeze. Ethan stood at the paddock, bell in hand. He rang it once, the sound spreading over the blackened land. Ash lifted his head immediately, amber eyes glinting in the moonlight. Slowly, he walked forward until his muzzle pressed against Ethan's chest. The contact was different than before, no longer hesitant, no longer fleeting. It was weight, choice, trust, freely given. Ethan felt it reverberate through him, steadier than any promise written on paper. He placed his hand on the Mustang's neck, his voice low. "I'm here. We'll figure this out together." Behind him, Lily leaned against the porch railing, watching. For the first time, the distance between father and daughter seemed less like a canyon and more like a bridge slowly forming. She whispered into the night, though she didn't think. He heard, "We're still a family." The stars burned cold above the valley, but the air felt warmer somehow, as if the land itself had acknowledged what had happened. That in the smoke and chaos, a bond had been sealed. The bell hung silent after, its purpose fulfilled for now. But Ethan knew he'd keep it close. Because in a world of fire, loss, and doubt. Sometimes a single sound could call something wild back home. The valley had worn smoke for so long that people forgot the scent of clean air. Charred hills stretched like scars across the horizon, black lines cutting through once golden sage. The coal farm bore its own wounds, fences half burned, patches of pasture reduced to ash. Yet even in ruin, life clung stubbornly. A green shoot pushed through blackened soil near the paddock, fragile and defiant. 3 days after the fire, the weather turned. Clouds gathered thick over the Tetons, rolling east with the weight of something promised. By late afternoon, thunder grumbled across the valley, and then rain came hard, soaking the brittle ground. It hissed against the scorched sage, darkening the soil, carrying with it the sharp, metallic scent of relief. Ethan stood in the yard, water dripping from the brim of his hat, his shirt plastered to his skin. He tilted his face upward, letting the rain wash the smoke from his pores. Beside him, Lily laughed, an unguarded, surprised laugh that startled them both. She held her arms wide, letting the storm drench her completely. Ash galloped in the paddock, tossing his mane, bucking at the thunder. His blue roan coat shimmered with each flash of lightning, dapples glowing silver blue under the storm's fury. Instead of fear, he carried joy, running circles as if the rain had awakened something ancient in his blood. Ethan leaned on the fence, his chest tight with wonder. The Mustang looked like he belonged not to them, not to this farm, but to the storm itself. By morning, the valley had changed. The ash-smudged land now smelled of sage again, revived by water. Neighbors returned to mend fences, exchange food, share stories of the fire. There was grief, yes. Barns lost, livestock gone, but there was also gratitude. Rain had drawn a line between what had been destroyed and what could be rebuilt. Amos Redbird visited that afternoon. He walked slowly through the mud, leaning on his carved stick, his braid soaked from the storm. He studied Ash, who watched him with steady eyes. "The land remembers," Amos said softly. "So do the horses. Fire burns, but rain heals. Both are truths we live by." Lily asked, "Does that mean we're safe now?" Amos's gaze lingered on her, kind but unflinching. "Safe? No. Fire and rain will come again. But tonight you have both trust and water. That is more than many are given." Later, Ethan sat on the porch, the smell of wet earth filling his lungs. He thought of the Grant letter tucked away, of whispered doubts in town, of Travis Pike's shadow that hadn't vanished with the fire. But for the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine a future not entirely bound by debt and loss. Inside, Lily lit a candle on the table. Its glow flickered against the damp windows, soft and steady. She looked at her father, then at Ash grazing outside, his coat catching the last silver of the storm. "It feels different," she said. Ethan nodded. "Because it is." The rain had done more than soak the soil. It had rinsed the valley clean, revealed what still stood. For Ethan, that meant more than land. It meant the fragile bridge between him and his daughter, and the bond with a horse who had chosen, again and again, to stay. That night, Ash pressed against the fence near the porch, his muzzle resting on the rail, as though he belonged in the circle of their small family. Ethan reached out, brushing the damp hair between his ears. The Mustang's breath was warm, steady. The rain had returned, and with it, the faint but undeniable sense that maybe they had too. The town square of Teton Falls had always looked its best in autumn. On the morning of the harvest fair, Main Street bloomed with stalls draped in gingham cloth, crates overflowing with apples, pumpkins stacked like orange pyramids. Strings of lights were strung from the lampposts to the courthouse, waiting for dusk to turn them into constellations. The air carried the sweet mix of kettle corn, cider, and hay bales warming under the sun. For the first time in months, Ethan walked among his neighbors without lowering his eyes. Lily walked beside him, her turquoise bracelet bright against her wrist, her steps lighter. At the center of the square, a small stage had been set up. The town council prepared to make announcements between bluegrass sets. Children darted between booths, faces painted with suns and leaves. But it wasn't the music or the food that had drawn such a crowd. Word had spread. Amos Redbird would be speaking, and Ethan Cole's Mustang, the dollar horse, as folks had come to call him, was to be part of the fair. Ash arrived in a borrowed trailer, and when Ethan let him out, heads turned. The blue roan shone under the autumn light, dapples glinting like polished steel, his mane black as night. He didn't shy at the noise. Instead, he stepped calmly, ears flicking to the rhythm of fiddles and laughter. Children pointed, parents whispered, veterans from the paddock nodded knowingly. Ethan felt the weight of every gaze, but for once it didn't crush him. He held the rope loose, trusting Ash to walk beside him. The Mustang's presence steadied him more than any speech could. The councilman took the microphone first, his voice carrying across the square. Today we celebrate not just harvest, but renewal. After drought and fire, after hardship none of us could carry alone, we gather stronger. And with help from the state grant, our irrigation district is secured for another season. No farm will go dry this year. Applause rose, but murmurs followed. Some still suspicious, some unwilling to forget debts. Ethan kept his eyes on Ash, who stood steady, tail swishing, unconcerned with politics. Then Amos stepped onto the stage. He didn't need a microphone. His presence alone drew silence. His stick tapped once against the wooden floor. This valley has always lived between fire and rain, he began. We know loss, and we know return. What matters is not what we keep for ourselves, but what we share so others may stand with us. He gestured toward Ethan and Ash. This horse came at the price of a single dollar. Some mocked it, some doubted it. But that dollar bought more than a horse. It bought a circle. A place where children who had no voice and veterans who carried too many ghosts could meet something wild and find trust again. The square was quiet, every word landing heavier than the autumn sun. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from shame this time, but from recognition. Amos wasn't speaking about him alone. He was speaking about all of them. When Amos finished, a boy from the crowd, one of the children who had stood in the paddock weeks earlier, stepped forward. His small hand reached for Ash, and the Mustang lowered his head, letting the boy's palm brush his muzzle. Gasps rippled through the onlookers, but Ash stood calm, steady as stone. Nora Kim, recorder in hand, captured every second. Her voice, soft but clear, narrated for her next broadcast. From $1 came a gift no one expected, the return of trust in a town nearly broken. As dusk fell, the fair glowed with lanterns and laughter. Lily danced briefly with friends near the bandstand, her face flushed with color Ethan hadn't seen in years. He leaned on the fence, watching her spin, watching Ash graze quietly nearby. For a rare moment, the world felt almost whole again. There were still debts to settle, still enemies lurking, but tonight belonged to the town, to his daughter, and to a horse that had refused to leave. Ethan pressed his hand against Ash's neck. The Mustang flicked an ear back, acknowledging without moving. Together they watched the lights rise against the autumn sky, silent witnesses to a season turning not just toward winter, but toward something like hope. The first frost of the season glazed the fence rails silver, crunching under Ethan's boots as he crossed the yard. The farm lay hushed, the fields bare, the scent of wood smoke curling from chimneys across the valley. It was the kind of morning that reminded him of how small a man could feel beneath the weight of mountains and sky. Yet he no longer carried that smallness like shame. Today, it felt more like belonging. Ash stood in the paddock, breath puffing white in the chill, dapples glowing faintly in the rising light. His coat had shed the last streaks of soot, and under the clear sky he looked renewed, a creature carved from storm and steel. Lily stood beside him, mittened hands, tucked into her jacket pockets. She had grown steadier, more herself, in the weeks since the fair. Her turquoise bracelet still circled her wrist, worn smooth now by constant touch. Ethan approached with the bell in his hand. He didn't ring it. Instead, he held it up to the morning sun, letting the light glint off its brass surface. Then he set it gently on the fence post, leaving it behind. Lily frowned. "You're not going to use it?" He shook his head. "Not today." He opened the gate. The creak of hinges echoed across the still farm. For a heartbeat, Ash remained where he was, ears flicking, muscles coiled with the memory of wildness. The world seemed to pause, waiting. Then, slowly, Ash stepped forward. One hoof, then another, until he crossed the threshold of the open gate. No rope guided him, no halter pressed against his face. He walked freely, his head level, his stride sure. He moved to Ethan's side and stopped, brushing his muzzle against the man's sleeve with quiet certainty. Lily's breath caught, and she covered her mouth with her hand. "He chose," she whispered. Ethan nodded, his throat too tight for words. His hand slid along Ash's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the coarse winter coat. The Mustang stood steady, eyes soft but alert, a balance of freedom and trust that no auctioneer's gavel could measure. They walked together across the yard, father, daughter, and horse. No ropes, no commands, just steps taken side by side. The sound of hooves on frost-bitten earth marked the rhythm of something larger than survival. It was belonging, earned and shared. At the edge of the pasture, Ethan paused, looking out over the valley. The fields were still scarred, the debts still tallied, the future still uncertain. But for the first time since loss had gutted him, he didn't feel hollow. The land had burned, the rain had returned, the town had doubted, and yet here he stood, with his daughter at his side and a Mustang that had chosen to stay. Lily slipped her hand into his. "We're okay, Dad." He looked down at her, then at Ash, then back toward the horizon. "Yeah," he said softly. "We are." The blue roan lifted his head, ears pricked toward the wind. He gave a low nicker, as if answering. And so, under a sky washed clean by autumn frost, they stood together, man, child, and horse. No rope, no fence. Only trust, stronger than debt, deeper than loss, and more enduring than fear. The bell remained on the fence post, silent, no longer needed. And now, it's your turn. If this story touched you, drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments. I'd love to see how many of you were here until the very end. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next story of courage, loss, and the bond between humans and horses. Because sometimes, the next chapter might just be the one that changes everything.